We're ready to go. So David, it's your meeting. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, George, for inviting me to speak tonight. Linda, I don't know much about you. Can you just give me a little tidbit?
You want me to tell you about me?
Yes, please.
Well, okay, I've been in IT since 1960. I started with IBM punch cards. I've been using Access since Access 1.0. I'm blessed to still have clients, and I work at home entirely.
Where are you then?
I'm in New York City, Queens,
Okay.
and I work remotely. I have clients I've never met, and I still enjoy what I do, which is, I think, the best part of the whole thing.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So can you see my screen without the video area?
I can see your screen,
Okay.
but I'm looking forward to this presentation.
Great. This is the second time that I've talked about graphics in Microsoft Access. I gave a presentation, a very short one, 20 minutes, earlier this year to Access DevCon, and that's Carl's group. Because George was in the audience, he asked me to present again to Pacific. And so this is the second version. This will be a little bit longer. I'll go into a little bit more detail as to how I do things in my forms and reports. Okay? As this slide shows, I'm a retired geologist, USGS, and then former Army officer. And I've been using Access since about Access 95, I think it was 95 and not 1. It definitely wasn't 1. I'm not a coder, and so you will not see a lot of code in my presentation tonight. There's a little bit in some of the modules, but most of what I do does not require code, so there's no reason to use it. I joined the Denver Area Access Users Group about 2000 and took my first Access class from Schofield about the same time. He taught me a lot of things that I probably don't remember because he was talking client server, and I don't do SQL Server or anything except for Access. Okay, so I just want to make sure that you understand I'm not a coder, and I actually have no formal training in graphics design. I look at images in magazines and books, and I ask myself, can I build that in Access? And most times I can. There are very few things I can't do in Access, and so that's it. I'm a visual thinker, and that's the reason for putting graphics into Microsoft Access. Now, everything I'm going to show you tonight is an Access database that I created in the last 2 days. Okay? So I'm going to start off with sort of an introduction to my application, which I call Proposals Essentials Plus. It's for proposal managers, and so you may not have any experience developing large proposals like I've done over the years. I've worked on proposals from $50,000 up to $20 billion. And so that's the reason for this application. It's to support those large value proposals that I've worked on. I use a standard architecture for this application. Main switchboard. I don't use the out-of-the-box navigation tools. I've created my own switchboard, as you can see here on the lower left side of the screen. Each one of those is a PowerPoint frame that I brought into Access, and then I put the open form commands behind it. Then there's secondary switchboards, and then the actual modules, the forms, the reports, subforms and sub-reports that are in this application. I got to try to get rid of this because it's in my way, okay? At the very bottom, I'm showing you that my desktop is customized a little bit so that I can do a lot of graphics without a lot of interaction with Access itself. So I've got left align, right align, top bottom, and then boldface type, because I use all of those tools in this application. Off to the right here, I'm showing that the graphics are in, well, I should say the graphics are in both the forms and the reports. Okay, and then on top of the graphics and those forms, quite often I have speech, and I use a simple speech routine to make Access talk. I've only found one person in the industry, the Access development industry, that has his database talking, besides myself. And I like having it talk. Sometimes when you open a form in PEP, which is what I call Proposal Essentials Plus, it will immediately start talking to you, and that's a bit of a delay and I've had to turn that off in some cases. So it's just standard architecture. Everyone who's touched Access uses this architecture. The forms and reports in PEP are a lot. I have a lot of forms and reports in this application. There are more than 6,500 objects in PEP at this time. A couple of months ago at DevCon, there were only 6,300, so I've added about 200 objects to it in the past 2 or 3 months. I'm going to talk specifically about the forms and reports that I have these little black arrows pointing to. Okay? This form also kind of shows you the workflow for a proposal. We start off in what we call pre-RFP, which stands for Request for Proposals, RFP, post-RFP, and then rebid. So if you already have a contract with a client, then you're rebidding work with that client. All right. And so that's just a standard terminology in my industry. Of the 6,500 objects, 3,940 right now are forms and subforms. 2,800 are reports and sub-reports, and I have about 3,500 tables in PEP. Okay? So that gives you some feel for how crazy I am. Linda's smiling, so she understands. All right, so the first thing is, why should you put graphics into an Access database? Well, very good reasons to do so. First of all, most people think visually. So 80% of what we see in visuals are remembered as opposed to 20% of what we read. 65% of people are visual learners like I am, and processing graphical information is 6,000 times faster than processing text. So if you want your users of your applications to quickly understand what all those rows of data mean, convert them to a graphic. Okay, so that's really the reason. Now, as developers, Linda and George and Kent, you can quickly enhance your applications, I would say, by putting graphics in there. Why enhance it? So that you sell more of your services. That's the way I think of it. Because your users will be getting more information, making faster decisions from your data. And when they make faster decisions, they come back to you and say, do it again. That's the idea here. And as I say here, it's very easy to add graphics to an Access application with little or no code. Okay, so that's my mantra. So I'm going to show you now several graphics that I have in PEP. The first one I call Sunset Crater charts. Sunset Crater is a volcano in northern Arizona. I lived in Arizona for 18 years, and I became a fairly decent volcanic geologist in that period of time. And so when I started working on graphics in this application, one of the first images that I put in was of a cinder cone, just like Sunset Crater is. The idea is that those circles you see there in the upper right corner, the silver circles, they represent boulders that are in rocks that are thrown out of a volcano. And those rocks move down the sides of the volcano under a gravitational pull. And so when I created this graphic, which is designed to tell you if this is a good customer or not, or good client or not, then the circles at the top represent a bad customer. And the circles at the bottom, as you see more of them, they represent a good customer. And I have on this chart 8 different criteria to represent how good a customer is. Okay, so that's what the labels mean. Is the customer trust? Do they trust you? And do you trust them? How innovative do the solutions that they give you or they want, how innovative are those solutions? I don't know who your customers are, so I can't really speak to them. But the idea is to look at these 8 different criteria and say for each one just how good it is. And this is subjective in a sense, but this graphic makes it a little bit more objective because each one of those values, and it's a Likert scale of 1 to 5, that gets encoded into the application and then stored for each proposal that you're looking at or each customer that you're working on, so that you can go back and compare one customer to another customer. And so for trust, for instance, I'm showing here that it's a 5. And then in this little table on the right, deviation versus max, I take and subtract 5, which is the maximum value, from the value for each one of those attributes. So 5 minus 5 is 0. So trust is 0. And so I do a little statistics, and I create what I call a dispersion value in that chart. And that's live. Change a value up in the top, and it automatically changes that value in the dispersion table. Okay? What's behind that? Very simple. Dot visible. And I'm sure all of you have used the dot visible statements in your applications. And this is the only code, for the most part, that's there. There's some error handling, but that's all I'm doing here is I start off with 40 circles. When the form opens, all 40 of those circles go blank. Make them invisible. And then based on the value, based on that attribute, a particular circle is unhidden or displayed. And that's all there is to it. The graphic itself was created in PowerPoint. These little circles are created in Access, and I'll show you later how I did that. And each one has a name. Each circle has a name. Trust 1 could be this upper right hand circle at the top of the cone. Trust 5 would be the one at the bottom of the cone, furthest from the vent area. Okay? Any, George, you want to ask questions?
The question I had was do you reuse this same metaphor with multiple clients? And if you do they quickly grasp the metaphor you're using, or is it something you have to train them?
This is designed so that you use it for different clients, but you brand it for each client. Okay? Throughout all of these slides, I'm using the same colors. I call it the salmon color here for behind failure modes, and then the grays. Those are the only colors that I really like to see when I open my database up. If I was selling this application to IBM, I would use blues and whites to brand it for IBM. And that's another way for you guys who are really professional developers to make more money, because you've got to charge your customer for that. Or you just have a standard set of forms and reports, and you sell it to everyone.
So do you have, how difficult is it to get people trained to recognize the metaphor you're using? Do they get it right away, or?
Well, I would say if you're selling to a small company or a large company, they're going to immediately recognize their branding. So trying to sell that to them is a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned.
I was kind of getting at the volcano metaphor itself.
Okay, yeah. Okay, one of the things about PEP is with 6,500 forms, no one client is ever going to use all of those forms and reports. So when you go in, you show them the application, and then say which one of these forms and reports basically you don't want to use. Because this application is designed for senior proposal managers, not for newbies.
Oh, okay. So
Then
this, okay.
Then you hide those forms and reports that customer doesn't want. And because it's all one application, you can also delete forms that they don't want, but I would prefer just to hide them and then bring them when they ask for them.
Yeah, all of a sudden, I get it. Yeah, so thank you for your patience, because
Yeah,
like,
no problem.
What's going on? Yeah.
No, I welcome those kinds of questions, because it's something that I want to make clear to everyone, is that everything that a proposal manager, I think, will ever want to do is already in this application. But at the same time, I add 1 or 2 modules a week. So 6,500 will probably be 7,000 by the end of the year. Okay? This report shows you what I call my tungsten wheel charts. My grandson's name is Tungsten, and so I use his name for this particular graphic, okay? And it's just some simple bars, so I call them spokes, lines into the center of the wheel, and then some other kind of cute things that I've added to these graphics. For each one of these graphics, there's a text box with a value. It could be a numerical value or a text value, and that is brought from the database, in this case, from the table for proposals, onto the form and also onto the report. So here are 4 tungsten wheels. They have different shapes, and I'll show you a lot of shapes here in a second. And each one has the same basic metaphor as you would call it, George. I'm just trying to spread out the information so that the user has an opportunity to make a decision faster than if he was looking at a table of rows and columns of data. Okay? And I'll show you all the tungsten wheels, or not all of them, but several more tungsten wheel charts here. I have 20 tungsten wheels in PowerPoint, and when I need one based on what information I want to show on a form or report, I bring that into view, and then I add the text fields to it. Some of these are left facing, some of them are left, right facing, top, bottom. Select the particular tungsten wheel that fits the data that I'm trying to show in a form or report. And I usually put this logo on each frame or each form and report that's in the database. You'll see that later. Okay? The next type of chart is a thermometer chart. And this uses a scale from 0 to 100. And in this particular case, I'm representing client assessments. And at the bottom here, you can see what I'm looking for each client that you will be pursuing business with. Does the client work with you to get your product, get their product sold? Do they work with you to innovate your product? What is their geographic reach? Is it a local company or is it one on the other side of the world? All of that information is encoded into this particular table and shown on these forms. Each one of those attributes uses a Likert scale of 1 to 5. I got the 1 to 5 from reading one of Daniel Kahneman's book. He's one of my favorite authors. What Kahneman says is, if you go to 10, most people aren't going to be able to differentiate between a 7 and a 10. So why do it? Make it easy for your users to understand data that they're looking at on a form or a report. And so using a scale of 1 to 5, I think it works well. Early on, I probably used some 1 to 10 Likerts, but for the last several years, I've only used 1 to 5. It makes it easy for me to think about what I'm doing, and it should make it easy for the customers. And for each one of those levels, use a different color in these little rectangles here, contract success factors and technology factors. So reds obviously means 1. That's not a good value. Green is good. Blue is almost, and black is, right in the middle or something for this particular table. And then for the thermometers themselves, I go back to the same principle I showed you a few minutes ago. Circle on, circle off, using a dot visible. That's all to it. So in this case, there might be, I think there are 10 or 11 circles on those thermometer charts. And based on the value that's calculated, 67 or 53, that controls which one of those circles is displayed. Simple. The next type of chart is I call Christmas tree lights. Nothing but conditional formatting. I'll take a criterion, in this case, years of experience, put a text box next to it, copy that text box and turn it from a text box into, make it a real text box and make it a small rectangle and give it the color that represents the value in the database. In this case, I'm using a 6 levels. And so green means good. It says exceeds the requirements. The lighter green means meets the requirements. So whatever the requirement is that the customer is asking for or the company's looking for, that gets encoded into the database and then color coded using conditional formatting. Probably notice that off to the left of each one of these reports, there's some instructions on what to do. In this case, you want to copy the text boxes from your table onto the form or the report and then use conditional formatting to set the colors. I create a legend or an explanation as you see here, and then create form buttons to open up secondary forms and reports. And those little squares off to the left, that's what they're doing. They're opening individual forms that are tied to lookup tables. Some people say, well, put all your lookup tables into one table. I think that would be very difficult to manage over a period of time. So each criterion in my database has a lookup table that stores that information, and then there is encoded. Each one of those values is coded. So for years of experience, near high requirement, that's coded here as a 5, and there's a 5 in that lookup table. There's a text string and then a value. And the database just looks at each one of those values. George, you come on? No, okay.
That's Jack.
That's Jack? Okay. The next type of graphic is what I call a Hölscher Fan. Lawrence Hölscher commented on one of my posts on LinkedIn last year, and I started sending him examples of graphics that I was creating, or forms I was creating, and he helped me to improve the look and feel of those objects. And so when I got around to creating a new custom graphic, I named it after him. You see, I like naming things after people, so that's the way I think, is to thank people when they help me. And so Lawrence helped me with some of the forms and reports in PEP. And this is a graphic that I built after talking with him. It's created in PowerPoint. Once again, I put on, in this case, probably 80 different circles. These circles are coming from Access and not from PowerPoint. And then they just layered on top of that graphic. The big circle can be any color that I want. Once again, I want to brand these graphics for the client. And whatever colors that client prefers to use, whether it's green, purple, or blue, that's what this branding will achieve. You don't have to do that. You make everything grays and whites, whatever, but I like trying to brand everything so that my customer gets immediate warm feeling from my graphics, that is in my forms and reports. Okay. The next type of graphic is a gauge. I ran across the gauge and I recreated that gauge in PowerPoint a couple years ago now, and I put it into PEP to show how good a company is about being competitive in whatever market they're in. So this is corporate competitiveness. So if Microsoft was using this particular tool, then this would be a competitive chart for Microsoft. Obviously, the red areas on the outer parts of this chart mean that that's not good. So if Microsoft was only sharing information about its competitors on an annual basis, that wouldn't be very good. If they're sharing information about competitors on a weekly or daily basis, then that's good. And that part of the grade gauge is colored green. Things in the middle are colored yellow on both sides of this graph. Okay? A lot of other text around here that's pretty specific to different customers, and I would customize it, but this is a mix of a graphic and lots of text boxes. And the size of the text boxes are decided upon based on the amount of information that may go into that text box. I think some of these may be multi-value fields, but I don't remember now. But I use multi-value fields fairly often in PEP. And this is a reason why I can use it in both the form and the report. Okay? The next type of chart in PEP is what I call a pipeline chart. It kind of looks like a the water pipes or the gas pipes in buildings. That's what this kind of represents to me. But this goes a lot further than that, because what this module is doing is taking all of the dates from the table, in this case the proposals table, taking the average of those dates, or durations actually, and placing them onto the pipeline graphic. Now for each proposal or our request proposal that comes into the company, there is the same information. These notification dates, that's the date that we found out about an opportunity, the date that the RFP was published, the date that the proposal team received that RFP, and first review, second review, and so forth. All of that is encoded in the PEP, and then the application creates the duration between each one of those attributes or values. And then that gets copied onto the pipe, and then the actual numbers for each proposal get copied onto the pipes. This is a kind of fairly detailed chart, but it has the benefit of telling the company that a RFP may be what we call wired for one of your competitors. If that RFP is wired, you don't want to waste time bidding it. Some proposals may cost the company $3 million. And if it's wired for one of your competitors, you want to get out of it as quickly as possible. And we call that no bidding. Okay? The next graphic is what I call a cityscape. I ran across a similar image somewhere on the net. I recreated that image of a city, the buildings in a city, in PowerPoint, and then copied that graphic using Snip and Sketch into Access. Position it, and then put some text boxes around it. Okay? Next one, I think George must have liked, because he posted it on LinkedIn. This is a NASA image of Pluto. I forgot which deep space mission went to Pluto, but they sent back some extremely detailed photographs, if you will, of the planet itself. I said, "Ooh, that's cool." And so I copied that, used a snip and sketch into Access, and then added text from my proposals table on top of that image. Colored some of the boxes so that they are consistent with the background colors that are on Pluto, the browns, the light colors. It's not as dramatic as I would like for it to be, because Pluto is kind of dark in places and light in other places, so it's hard to match the colors. But that's all this is, text boxes placed on top of an image. The next one is a calendar chart or a timeline chart, and it's was created back in Access 2007, Access 2010. Since then, Microsoft deprecated the ActiveX calendar, and I had to create another way to represent all the dates associated with proposals. But with ActiveX controls, if you're still using 2007, 2010, you could do this. Each one of those calendars represents a different milestone for a proposal. And I've mentioned this before. when was the RFP published? When was it received by the proposal development team? When are questions due? First, second, third reviews. And as soon as you open this form, all of that information is right there in front of you. You don't have to do anything. It was instantaneous. And that's why I liked using the ActiveX controls. I have bad things to say about Microsoft for killing off the ActiveX control for this reason. But I figured out a way to get around it, and I'm okay now. Now, you see the red bar there about 3/4 of the way down. That red bar says that on the date that this form was displayed on my computer, that was where the process was. In other words, phase 3 was where it was in October 2012 for this particular proposal. I call it Denver Construction Service. That's the name of the proposal. That's where we were. So I immediately see every milestone. I immediately see where we are today. And I can also tell if the dates are on a weekend or a weekday. That's all immediately visible in a chart like this. The next one is Peacock Fan. I created this 4 or 5 years ago. I've kind of gotten away from it. I now use the Tungsten Wheel for a similar purpose. But if a customer of mine likes this particular graphic, it's easy for me to drop it in and make them happy. Next one is maps. I had a customer until last year that had people in different parts of the country. And they only had people in 4 parts of the country, but in order to create a map that would be universally usable, I had to map all of the states. I had to put values for each one of the states onto a map. This kind of a graphic is a pain to work with because of the size of the states in the northeast part of the country. For some reason, Access has a hard time dealing with text and numbers on the same row and the same column in a graphic. And so doing this is a pain. I don't like leaders, that is the lines from a number to a state boundary. So I have to just position things by eye, and sometimes that doesn't work. Early in 2020, I used the same background image, which I got from the USGS's website, for the number of cases of COVID in the United States. So I just mapped in each state, same way, COVID cases, and then I had the number of deaths. Once the number of deaths got above a certain number, I just abandoned doing that chart from that point on. It was just too morbid for me. Anything that can be put onto a map, then you can find a map on the internet, bring it into PowerPoint, manipulate it however you want to, and then copy that into Access. And this is very simple. At the bottom, I've got the number of staff that this company added to its organization, say, in the past year. A lot fewer states there, 10 states, and that's all I'm trying to represent is the number of new hires for this particular company. And those numbers are going to change perhaps every month. And if they do, you just put the number into the table, print the report. The CEO is happy or not happy with the performance of his or her salespeople, and the next month things change again. Almost to the bottom.
Quick question. Have you tried using the new charting tool that includes maps?
I don't know of a new tool. I've in the past, Jack, I've used MapPoint. I was in the government. I used ArcView, ArcGIS, and GeoMedia as my geographic information systems. I don't know of a tool that plugs into Access. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, a couple weeks ago, I ran across an article in MIT Sloan that described the moods of teams. And so I said to myself, can I create a quadrant chart in Access? I thought about it for a few hours. I said, sure. All this is a square, and it's mapping the four corners. The X and Y values are -1, 1, 1, 1, -1, -1, 1, -1. I can deal with that. So by the next day, I ended up having, the start of a graphic would be a quadrant diagram like I just showed you. And I'll go to the final one here. So based on the values for driver and goal, and you have to read the paper to see where I get that from, one of those squares will turn a particular color and display the text associated with that square so that the decision maker can quickly come up with an idea to move forward or not in a team. And in proposals, some of our teams might be 2 people. In other cases, I've been on teams with 50 people. So it's important to understand the mood of and the emotions of a team so that you know how they're going to vote when a vote comes to be. Okay, so each one of these squares has different text, and I didn't get around to giving you multiple colors, but I could do that. Very simple. Coordinates, this upper right one for align emotions is saying 1 and 1, color the upper right square. Very, very simple. Okay. This is the last slide, well, almost the last slide, perhaps. These are some of the insight that I would want to present to you. And if you're going to use a lot of graphics in your databases, first, know as much as you can about your client's industry. I had a client that was in construction management, and I read as much as I could about the construction management industry. I've had clients who were in the telecommunications industry, and I studied that industry the best I could. Point 1. Point 2 is create a library of images that you can reuse when you need to. I can now create just about any form and report in PEP using the graphics that I've created over the past several years. Just screenshots. Drop them into a form or report, add the text, and I'm done. With that, you should never stop creating new graphics. I created a new graphic last night, for instance, all right, before doing some more work on this presentation. Keep creating new graphics. Look in your magazines and your books and find things that attract you. If they attract you, you can sell it, I think. You want to brand your graphics for each customer if you have time. If you don't have time, You want to come up with one branding for all of the forms and reports in your database, and then you will sell that application to your customers. Do not use copyrighted images in your applications. You know that, and I just want to emphasize that. If you go to a website called pixabay.com, you'll find a lot of free images and graphics that you can bring into your application and use them by just saying, this came from Pixabay. Or you can subscribe to a service and pay for pay for your images that way. But make sure that you have the rights, or you're given free royalty-free images, or using royalty-free images. Make your forms and reports easy to change by you or by your knowledge customers who you allow to modify your application. I know most developers lock their applications down. This application is not locked down. You know, I about every few years I might lock it down, but most times it's not locked down. It's designed so that the end user can make changes to it, add new tables, forms, and reports. Don't be afraid, as I said earlier, to get rid of a graphic that you don't like anymore. I don't like peacocks anymore, so I don't use them. Know what questions your users will be asked by their bosses. And I'm saying that because your users will probably be middle managers and specialists, subject matter experts. What questions will they be asked by the CEO of the company when they have to make a presentation? Anticipate what they have to deal with and build your graphics to respond to those. And then, as number 15 here says, you want to be able to tell a good story with your graphics. Just throwing a graphic up there, you know, who cares? You've got to tell a story. Know your data, or know the data that's in the database so that you can use it effectively. And finally, a lot of people out there are colorblind. I've got a friend in Cincinnati who's colorblind. I have to accommodate him when I send him graphics, and I used to do that quite often. So if you're working with a customer, especially your first line clients and customers, make sure that you know if they're colorblind or not, and what kind of color blindness do they have, so that you can accommodate them in your applications. So with that, I'd like to say thanks, George, again, for inviting me, Kent for listening, to Jack and Linda. You have questions?
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, that was really interesting, and I appreciated the fact that you had time to actually maintain a calm pace, because that made it a lot easier to follow what you're talking about as you were going. So I appreciate that. Do you ever buy graphics, or is that something you would kind of save as a last resort?
Yeah, I bought graphics. I have one set of pictures, I would say, that I purchased 10, 15 years ago. But if, as I said, go to Pixabay and see if you see anything there that you like. And if Pixabay doesn't have it, then go to something else. Photo something, I can't remember now. But I have purchased CDs with images, DVDs. But the other thing is, if I see something on the web, I'll do a screenshot, bring it into PowerPoint, and redraw it. So it's now mine. I don't have to worry about that if I redraw it. At least that's the way I think about it.
So you can kind of stylize,
yes,
or change colors or something to make it representation without the.
You need to change at least 10%, I think it is.
And It's always more than 10% for me.
Excellent. So Jack,
Anyway, the charting I was referring to is what's in Excel right now, is that they do maps of the U.S. or the world as one of their newer map types.
Okay.
And I'm hoping that we'll see it show up in Access eventually. But for now, one thing a person would be able to do is push that all out as Excel out the back end to create the chart, take the chart, send it, save it as a bitmap, and then bring it back into Access, and they'd never know that it's just happened.
Yeah. Well, the other external tool is Power BI. It will do maps, and it does a very good job of maps. My philosophy is, if I can do it in Access, I want to do it in Access. I'll bring images in from PowerPoint, but I want to just stay within the Access domain.
do you find that your clients are more comfortable working in that environment than, like Jack said, Power BI or all? There's a lot of technologies going on right now. So
Yeah.
is it comfort level with your clients as well, do you think?
Yeah, it's hard enough just getting some of them to use Access. If they don't have to go out to Power BI or to Tableau or Click, then it makes it just that much more easy for them to use their data. That's the way I think of it.
I think I have one more question, but I need to ignore you for a second while I look at my list. Tell me you already addressed it. Yeah. You already addressed it.
Okay. Did Linda drop? I don't see her image anymore.
Linda's there.
I can talk.
Okay, great.
Thank
Do you
you.
have any, do you have any
Very-
questions, Linda?
No, it's a very, it's interesting. I don't tend to use graphics, except, like sometimes signatures or the logo for the client.
Yeah.
But, I have to think about it more now that I've seen your presentation.
Okay. In proposal development, I took a class from one of the main consultants back in '98. He told us that a proposal should be 50% graphics in '98. Okay, if I translate that into an Access database, I would say now 10 to 20% of an Access database should be graphics.
Well, I used to say that the best way to get to your boss, if you have a boss or a client, is to have a graph. They love graphs.
Exactly. A lot of people love graphs because, as I said earlier, it's easy for them to understand the data.
One of my favorite graphs, when I was as an employee years ago, I drew a circle and it basically had a straight line down the middle. And what it showed, they assumed maintenance was free. And I showed that half of our work was maintenance. So this stupid little graph with a circle with a straight line got their attention.
Yeah.
It makes the point. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, as I said,
Telling them didn't help. That graph, as silly as it was, did explain it.
Yeah, make your graphics simple to understand. Use as many as you can. And although I said 20% in a database, it took me years to come up with enough ideas to create what I showed you today.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, it's not right there.
No, it's a lot.
It's a lot of work. And with one of those, most of those reports, there was a line item there that says, test your report, test your forms. You got to make sure that things fit.
Yes.
Okay. There are a few problems with Access. on my machine, if I bring an object in directly from PowerPoint, I get an OLE server error. I don't know what that means. I don't care because the snip and sketch tool in Windows does a fantastic job of copying images, and I can paste in them into Access.
This is how it worked at IBM, is they have a committee or maybe a person or a group of people, and you're supposed to, if you have an error message, you're supposed to submit it to this group, and then they decide if it's a new message or not. Most programmers they just don't want to be bothered. So they pick the closest error message, which is why Microsoft's error messages are so funny. One night I had a problem. I was working with someone, and the thing wasn't in the list. And we're so accustomed to having stupid error messages that we spent half an hour until we figured out it wasn't in the list.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I have a
when you
similar
see a
story.
Microsoft error message, just understand that they picked it out of a hat rather than
Well, I
going to the
think-
committee and trying to get a new number.
Yeah, we hear about that a lot in the forums. Very generic
Yeah.
error. So the other question that I had noted and then forgotten, I just remembered again, is relative file sizes of your ACCDBs with one of these large proposals. Do they get pretty big?
Yeah, I've been working on this Access first MDB and now ACCD file for 20 years, and it is only at 1.6 gigabytes. And as I said earlier, if I had another customer that I sold this to, I would either hide or remove certain modules, forms, and reports from that database before giving it to them. So that would bring it down.
So,
So
But I don't see, yeah,
we've got to be part of your strategies.
yes. That's it.
Okay, great.
You
Well,
have
thanks again.
any other questions? See, Kent was on earlier and he dropped off. And Jack's on. Anything else, Jack?
So that's it.
Great. Well, thank you again. I'm glad we did this because I think a lot of people are going to be interested in being able to do. Well, what I like about it, I guess, is the fact that it doesn't require somebody to go out and learn a whole new technology like Power BI. You know, if you're comfortable with Access, you can do a lot of these things without investing a lot of study time in new technology. And I think that's something a lot of Access people can take advantage of. Appreciate that. Oh, Kent has a question here. He's on mute. So, do you store your images internally or as attachments? Or externally, I should say.
These images are pasted, Kent, into the forms and reports. Now, there are other kinds of images that you would store external or internal. I don't use them. I don't use the external images. And I don't see a large hit to the size of the database when I put more images in. I would say of the 6,000 forms and reports in PEP, maybe 20% have a graphic of one type or another in them. I'm still at 1.6 gigabytes. Sometime in the future, I might hit that 2 gigabyte limit. Some people have already told me that I can't have 6,000 forms and reports. I've already surpassed that. So at some point, this thing will kill itself. What I do to prepare myself for that time is I back up this database every couple of days. So if it does crash, I go back to the previous version and start deleting stuff.
Right. Now, have you tried using the image gallery?
Yeah, I don't need it.
The reason I ask is that by using the image gallery, you have the ability to change out that image such that if you were to use the same image on multiple pages, you can change it anytime and it changes as all places at once. And it only counts as one image instead of it counting that image being pasted multiple times.
Right.
Additionally, if I'm understanding what you're doing, is you're tending to take and hiding an image that you have on a page and bringing forward the image you want them to see as you're changing some of the numbers when you want the slider to move over, show a higher number or percentage. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm just hiding. The only thing I hide and unhide are the circles. Say on Sunset Crater, the thermometers, that's the only images that get hidden in this application currently.
Okay. Because that's where using that image gallery type, you can actually on our page say use this image, and it's just a matter of changing it. And so you're not actually hiding, you're just switching which image is actually being displayed.
Okay, the reason for hiding and unhiding the images is because of the positioning. They are precisely positioned by eye as opposed to mathematically onto the forms and reports.
Gotcha.
Okay, so if you go back and look at the Sunset Crater chart, those circles are not on a straight line, horizontal or vertical. They're on a slant, and each one has to be referenced separately in order to do what I did. It will be, I could use, say, horizontal, vertical, dot horizontal, dot vertical, but it wouldn't work in that case.
Do you ever have trouble with it changing fits then when it's on bigger monitors versus smaller monitors?
The whole form changes shape or size, but I don't think the graphics do. And I've got a 27-inch or 30-inch monitor all here. I've never seen that problem, but it might happen. It might happen.
We might be circling back at some point, but I think we better call it quits for tonight. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. We have somebody now. Crystal is preparing all the videos, and she does a lot of the production. So it'll be up as soon as she has time to process it and make it available to the other YouTube with the others. I have a couple of ideas for next month, but I think I'll send out a little. How do you guys like the MailChimp stuff? Is that useful, not useful?
Good reminder.
It's a good reminder. I wonder sometimes because nobody ever responds, and I think maybe it's just going into a black hole, but I'll continue to do that.
And finally, if you have questions, comments, shoot them off to me because this application grows every week.
Oh, yeah, and your email address is right there on this last slide. So if you want to take a minute and copy that down, and you can get a hold of David. And
Okay.
Appreciate it. Have a good
Thank you.
July.
Okay. Good night.
See you next month.
Thanks, David. That was great, actually.
Thank you.
Thanks much.